worked that out yet. How many Americans are on board?
Sure. So we are aware of a U.S.-bound flight that had to make an emergency landing in Russia and are continuing to monitor that situation closely. I'm not able to confirm how many U.S. citizens were aboard the flight at this time. Of course, Simon, as you note, it was a flight that was bound for the United States. So it is, of course, likely that there are American citizens on board. As you probably also saw, there's public reporting from Air India that they are sending what my understanding is a replacement aircraft to the destination to have the passengers carry on for their route, but I would defer to the air carrier to speak to anything further on this.
If it comes to it, maybe that's not the case, since if there's a replacement aircraft, but if there needed to be, parts, export of parts that needed to have exemptions for the various embargoes and sanctions for Russia, is that something that you would allow to?
I'm just not going to speculate on that here, and of course we'll let Air India speak to any steps that they're taking as it relates to mitigating the technical issues.
And your efforts to work out the more details on that, has that involved contacting Russian officials? Has there been any?
I'm not going to get into specifics, but of course there are steps that we can take in assessing manifests and passengers who may be bound for the United States. But again, I'm just not going to get ahead of this process beyond saying that we are continuing to monitor the situation. Anything else on this before we move away?
Can I just stay in Korea?
Sure, go ahead.
Actually, not stay, but go back to Korea.
Yeah, just and then I'll come to you, Jenny.
Sure. Just briefly. I think Jenny might have mentioned this slightly, but China and Russia had air exercises over the body of water between the Korean Peninsula and Japan. Does the U.S. have any comment on this? I know it's not the first time, but in terms of Chinese-Russian cooperation, what that means?
Look, part of the reasons why we continue to invest and align in our close partnerships and alliance with our Japanese and ROK partners is continue to deepen this cooperation as it leads to what our view is a free and open Indo-Pacific, one that is governed by a rules-based order. I will refer to these own countries to speak to any incursions in their own airspace, but we of course continue to be mindful of any kind of destabilizing or kinetic activity that could be interpreted as destabilizing or as reckless. Anything else? Jenny, go ahead.
On Sudan, can you confirm that the talks have resumed in Jeddah, and is the U.S. playing a mediation role in them again?
So I don't have any updates on the specific topics, Jenny, but it is our resolute belief that only a diplomatic solution will resolve this conflict. There is no military solution in our point of view. And as a reminder, as it's related to efforts to continue to press both parties, we have imposed visa restrictions, we have levied economic sanctions, we have updated our relevant business advisories, and we stand ready to take additional steps as needed. But specifically as it relates to the Jeddah talks, we continue to remain deeply engaged on those, and we will continue to be focused on facilitating not just humanitarian assistance, but pressing for agreement on near-term and confidence-building steps between the parties.
And on Sudan still, do you have an update on how many Americans are seeking assistance to get out of the country? Is there still a robust effort by this department to assist them now that the evacuations have ended?
I don't have any updated metrics or numbers beyond when we've last spoke about this a number of weeks ago. But since at the time of the heightened violence and the heightened operations that were taking place, the U.S. government facilitated the departure of more than 2,000 people total from Sudan. 1,300 of those were U.S. citizens, and approximately 700 were on the convoys to Port Sudan. We continue to provide information for remaining U.S. citizens in Sudan, including the various exit options that exist. U.S. citizens who remain in Sudan who need assistance should contact the closest embassy or consulate, and information on possible options to depart Sudan continue to be found available in the security alerts that we've offered. Saeed, go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. last Thursday, the Israeli army of soldiers shot a 2-year-old boy. He died yesterday, Mohammed Tamimi. And, I mean, I have a grandson who was almost 2 years old. If he gets a mosquito bite, the whole family goes nuts. And can you imagine how his parents and grandparents and his family and the people in his village feel? Do you call on the Israelis to do an investigation and those responsible be brought to justice?
I can't imagine, Said, because the thought and pain that must be involved in losing a child, I'm sure, is unimaginable. And I spoke a little bit about this when you asked another question earlier in the week. We express our sincere condolences to the family of this child who was tragically killed. It's our understanding that the IDF is investigating the incident, and broadly speaking, we urge investigations into any operations that result in civilian casualties.
But, the IDF does not have really good record in investigation. It seems that Senator Chris Van Hollen just issued a statement yesterday on the letter that he received finally after questioning the diplomat properly last week. He got the summation by General Fenzil, and they clearly state that they were not allowed to see the evidence and so on. Do you have any comment on that? So Israel investigating itself has a horrific record of not really telling the truth.
Said, these are very complicated circumstances, but you are talking about two very different circumstances.
All investigation,
and as it
killing
relates
Palestinians.
as it relates to this investigation, we have condemned the tragic killing of Shireen Abu Akleh and continue to do so, and our hearts remain with her family and her friends and her loved ones, even currently. As you all know, not only was Shireen a U.S. citizen, but she was a reporter, and press freedom, our belief is that it remains the bedrock of democracy. We've also been clear about the importance of accountability when it comes to this. Part of accountability is preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future, and we have engaged directly with Israel and other countries on this to ensure that rules of engagement and various things are looked at appropriately to ensure that the risk to journalists, risk to civilians are significantly mitigated.
Yeah, my last question. Yesterday, Secretary Blinken, alluded or spoke about how settlements are an obstacle to peace. And then, we saw that the Israelis are now meeting to actually launch new major settlements, perhaps dividing the West Bank in half. And then, we see the plans for demolishing homes and so on. You have any comment on that? It seems that the Israelis, you say something, don't do this, they turn around and do it because you don't leverage it.
I take issue with that, Said, that we don't leverage it. We engage on this and raise directly with our partners in Israel, with the Palestinian Authority, and we have been very clear in public, in private, that the only realistic path to compromise and lasting peace that permanently ends this conflict is through direct negotiations between the parties, not unilateral actions. Our view has been clear and consistent, and you heard the Secretary speak a great deal about this yesterday morning. The expansion of settlements undermines the geographic viability of a two-state solution. It incites tensions, and it further harms trust between the parties. And when we from the United States see steps taken by either side that undermine or harm that trust, we are vocal about it, not just with the parties directly, but with our regional partners and others in the region who are also part of this process as well.
So are you saying then that when you say that you do leverage your influence, that you have been successful in convincing the Israeli government not to proceed with certain settlement expansion?
Matt, what I'm saying is that we have not hesitated to raise directly.
To what end? What's been the result? Are you saying it seems like in response to Saeed's question, you're saying you have had some success when you come out and tell the Israelis that you think
I'm not going to get
idea.
into the. I'm not going to get into the
specifics. If you have had some success, please tell us.
I'm certainly not going to get into
What projects have you successfully lobbied the Israelis against?
I'm certainly not going to get into the specifics of diplomatic engagements and what the end product of those engagements are, Matt. I will reiterate again, though, that we have raised these issues directly.
Then let's just put it this way. Have you seen settlement expansion increase over the course of since this administration has been in office, or decrease or stay the same?
Matt, I will just leave it at that. We have raised these issues directly with our Israeli partners and with the Palestinian authorities.
Is there an increase in settlement expansion activity since over the course of the last 2 years?
Matt, we have been clear that when we have seen settlement activity take place, including over the course of this administration, we have been vocal about it. We have expressed our serious concern and the steps that it does to the overall process.
I don't think anyone is saying that you haven't done that. The question is whether you've seen any results from that.
I'm not going to get into the specifics of our diplomatic engagements, Matt. What those end products are. Nike, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have any update on Clinton Brink's meetings in Beijing, and is he on the way back to the United States? And is it fair to say that his meetings in Beijing is paving the way for Secretary Blinken's to reschedule his trip to China?
As it relates to the Secretary's travel, I spoke a little bit about this yesterday. Don't have any updates or on that. I would just note that, as we have previously said, we look forward to rescheduling that visit when conditions allow. But Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink was in China with NSC Senior Director Sarah Barron, where they had a number of meetings with MFA officials. They had candid and productive discussions, and they met with Executive Vice Foreign Minister Ma Zhaozhu and Director General for North America Yang Tao. These meetings focused on a number of bilateral issues, cross-strait issues, and addressing challenges. I spoke a little bit yesterday that they spoke about things that we view as very important to the bilateral relationship: addressing climate change, addressing fentanyl precursors, addressing human rights, as well as wrongfully detained American citizens. Our viewpoint is that there is no substitute for in-person meetings or engagements, whether they be in Washington and Beijing, to carry forward our discussion. But I don't have anything else to offer on his travels.
Is it the U.S.'s assessment that China is ready to take steps to stabilize relationship with the United States, given reports that Secretary Blinken is visiting China in upcoming weeks?
I'm not going to characterize, and it's not for me to characterize how another country views their relationship with the United States. What I can share is that our viewpoint continues to be, and this is Nike, not something new you've heard me say, our viewpoint is that the international community expects us to manage our relationship with the PRC responsibly, and that's something that we intend to do. And these engagements from Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink and NSC Senior Director Barron are part of that. There are a number of issues that are of immense importance to us that have a nexus to the PRC, whether that be addressing the climate crisis. A significant portion of the world's trade flows through the Taiwan Strait. Addressing fentanyl precursors. These are all things you've heard the Secretary speak to, and we view that because of all of these things and many more, it is in our interest to manage this relationship responsibly, and we will intend to do so. Abby, go ahead.
Does the State Department have any comment or concerns about the agreement to merge the PGA Tour with LIV Golf, which is backed by the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund, which is controlled by the Crown Prince?
I don't have an assessment on that from the State Department.
Can I ask an unrelated question?
Sure.
The State Department announced the departure of First Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer Gina Abercrombie Winstanley today. After more than 2 years, can you talk about some of the progress that has been made to diversify diplomatic ranks and to increase the representation of minorities at senior levels?
Certainly. So we are after 2 years of extending service, we are very sad to see Ambassador Abercrombie Winstanley go. She'll be leaving this role at the end of June. And to take a little bit of a step back, the Secretary appointed her as the department's first Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer and launched the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at the beginning of this administration to ensure something that you see him talk about very clearly, that our foreign policy delivers for the American people, and a key tenet of that being that our workforce look like and be reflective of the country that we serve. And so just to offer some thoughts on Ambassador Abercrombie Winstanley's tenure here, it was during her time that she was very integral in developing our 5-year plan on our DEIA strategic plan that we see as a roadmap for how we can continue this important work. I will also note that this office is not going anywhere. We look forward to announcing Ambassador Abercrombie Winstanley's replacement very soon. In the interim, there will be a senior official from her office assuming duties. But also I will note that it is because of the ambassador's work that the advancement of DEIA became and continues to be a requirement for all State Department employees. It is a factor when factoring in promotions for the Foreign Service and Civil Service and the Senior Executive Service and things like that. Her work has also been integral in establishing a demographic report so that we can ensure that the measures and the steps that we are taking in the department can be cross-referenced against our goals. A number of bureaus across this department have senior advisors focused on this DEIA work. And so this continues to be something that is of utmost importance to the Secretary, and we look forward to having more to announce soon.
Do you have any specific metrics, though, that you can speak to as far as the increase at senior levels of
I'm happy to see if we have specific data points that we can share. Anything else on this before we move away? All right, Hudson, go ahead.
Pertaining to Secretary Blinken's attendance of Henry Kissinger's birthday party last night, I wanted to ask, what does Secretary Blinken like about Henry Kissinger? Obviously, there is extensive documentation associating Kissinger with bombing campaigns in Cambodia and Vietnam and overthrowing democratically elected governments in the developing world and allegedly supporting genocidal policies in Bangladesh. But to be fair to Dr. Kissinger, he also was a key architect of the outreach to China, and he transformed the U.S.-China relationship. Of course, in this administration, you've seen the U.S.-China relationship take a plunge. And really have officials question the fundamental premises of the U.S.-China relationship. It just has me sort of curious, what does Secretary Blinken like about Henry Kissinger?
Well, John, first to take a step back, this was a private event that the Secretary was invited to. I'm not going to get into so many specifics as it was a private closed press event. That being said, the Secretary has a relationship with a number of his predecessors and has remained in touch with them over the course of his tenure as Secretary. And there is, of course, important perspective to be gained through those conversations with predecessors, and it is Dr. Kissinger, Secretary Kissinger, is someone who the Secretary has had the opportunity to engage with at a number of instances throughout the Secretary's tenure. But I'm just going to leave it at that, as it was a private event yesterday.
So it's just sort of like an alumni club, and whether there are differences on policies that's not relevant?
John, of course there are differences in policies. There's differences in policies across administrations. The point that I'm making is that, one, this was a private event. Two, I'm not going to parse these specific relationships. The Secretary has a good and cordial relationship with a number of his predecessors and has had the opportunity to engage with them at a number of events over the past 2 years since Secretary Blinken has been Secretary. And there is important perspective to be had and gained as it relates to the role, regardless of the very distinct policy differences that have existed across administrations. But I'm not going to.
Last thing, but one of the reasons I asked is, the Blinken State Department also hosted Dr. Kissinger at an event when the French president was visiting. When the secretary was working on his thesis, also interviewed Dr. Kissinger. So it does seem like there is a long-standing interest that he's had in him. I just was wondering if you had any more flesh on the bone.
Secretary Kissinger obviously has a very storied and experienced career when it comes to national security and foreign policy. It would make sense that any enterprising student who may or may not be writing a thesis, that he would be an interesting person for them to speak to. But again, these events were private events, at least the one yesterday, so I don't have anything additional to offer.
Can I drill down? Hold on. Can I drill down into this? You say the secretary has a warm and cordial relationship with a number of his predecessors. Would you say with all?
I'm not going
of
to
his
parse them, Matt.
predecessors?
I appreciate.
Or are there some of his predecessors who are still living who he does not have?
I certainly appreciate the question, and I am not going to parse it any further. But
you don't have,
but nice try.
But it's not. So it's not all.
You've heard me say he has a cordial and close relationship with a number of his predecessors. I'm not going to. John's question was about Dr. Kissinger, so I was just offering some context. I know what you're asking about. But we're gonna move on.
So what about the point that he made about Laos, about Chile,
Said,
about Bangladesh?
one of the first things I said was that we have we have a number of differing viewpoints when it comes to foreign policy. We're talking about an administration that Secretary Kissinger served in, that at least was before I was born. So I really don't have any further assessments to offer beyond that. Gita, go ahead. Sure, Matt. Gita, go ahead.
Thanks. I want to go back to your topper about Vahid Afghani being in prison in Iran. Numerous U.S. officials have talked about prisoners in Iran. Human rights violators have been sanctioned for this purpose, but clearly it hasn't really made any impact on how the Islamic Republic treats people when they're talking about their human rights. Don't you think a new strategy is required, something like, I don't know, maybe tying this to Iranian assets that Iran is seeking to be released, as reportedly is also involved in the release of dual nationals?
I think if you were to ask the Iranian regime, they would tell you that American sanctions are significantly impacting their economy. They are contributing to inflation and unemployment in the Iranian Republic.
Their behavior.
But it is having a direct impact on their country and their people. And that's not to say we couldn't take additional further action. I'm certainly not going to read out all the tools that we have at our disposal from here. But as it relates to Iran and continuing to hold Iran accountable for its egregious human rights abuses, for its malign and destabilizing activities, of course, a big piece of that is their continued arbitrary detention of citizens, not just of American descent, but from others around the world. We'll continue to take steps to hold the Iranian regime accountable.
Okay, one more, please.
She's still asking a question. I'll come to you after.
About 12 hours before the Treasury today announced sanctions against a number of companies involved in Iran's missiles program. Iran unveiled its hypersonic missiles. Any comments?
So we're aware of those claims by Iran. Our concerns about Iran's missile program are well established, Gita. The Iranian regime continues to destabilize the Middle East region, including by developing and proliferating dangerous weapons. The U.S. continues to work with allies and partners, including in the region, to deter and counter Iran's destabilizing behavior. And we're committed to using a range of available non-proliferation tools to address Iran's missile development and proliferation efforts. The sanctions that we announced today on Iran's missile procurement reaffirm that commitment.
Can I ask one on Afghanistan,
Sure.
please? Russian Foreign Minister
I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Lavrov has reportedly said that the United States is supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. How would you categorize this comment?
I would categorize that comment as Russian propaganda. Go ahead.
Just a follow-up.
Yeah.
Two questions on Iran.
Yeah.
Going back to the topic again, can you give us more details on why did you pick on particularly this case for today's topper? He has been, other than the fact that he has been in solitary confinement for more than 1,000 days.
There, of course, as you said, Alex, there are a number of examples. I hate to use that word because these are very serious human cases in which real lives are affected. But there are a number of examples in which Iran has taken egregious actions, has egregiously violated people's human rights, have not respected fair trial guarantees or other basics when it comes to these kinds of things. We wanted to just draw attention to this particular case, given the longevity, certainly not the longest time or anything like that, but we wanted to draw attention to his case.
Do you have an update on this particular case? Any news about?
I don't have any updates to offer.
And you supported the sanctions policy in your response to it, which I couldn't agree more. But I don't understand why, when it comes to human rights, the administration is so timid in terms of sanctioning Iran's supreme leader for this very crime that he's committing.
Alex, when we take a look at our designations, first, I'm not going to preview designations or actions that the government may take from here, but when we take actions or designations in any country, we do so in close coordination with our allies and partners. We do so in close coordination across the interagency, and we do so in a way to ensure that they are the most potent and have the most impact. And I would say that American sanctions, regardless of what the specific entities and targets are, those of course have an impact, but broadly, if you across the board as it comes to Iran's economy, what we're seeing, the suffering from the Iranian people, that our sanctions have held to account and will continue to hold to account the egregious violations that we're seeing, not just as it relates to the Iranian people, but its activities in the region broadly. Go ahead.
Excuse me. How does the USA see the reapproachment between Egypt and Iran, which is seem imminent after the visit of the Oman Sultan to the last month to the Egypt and the Tehran, and the welcoming of supreme leader in Iran, Khamenei, and the second part, like, did Egypt or Oman as an ally or partner with the USA share or participate any talks about this reapproachment between Egypt and Iran, specifically that seen as like success for Iran in diplomatic levels after the reapproachment with the Saudi Arabia, with the like coordination of China?
I'm certainly not going to get into specifics of our diplomatic engagements, but when it comes to the challenge posed by Iran and the malign and destabilizing activities that it conducts, not just in the region, but across the international community broadly, one of our key tenets continues to be close coordination with our allies and partners as it relates to this. And of course, in the region, Egypt continues to be an important partner on a number of fronts. There are avenues for security cooperation and collaboration in other areas as well, but I'm not going to get any further
So how
specific.
you evaluate this, like Egypt and Iran, if they going to reapproachment their relationship, it's going to be like big deal in the Middle East.
Well, of course, we would certainly take issue with countries that are going to take steps to further normalize or deepen their collaboration with or cooperation with the Iranian regime. But as it relates to tackling the challenge posed by Iran, we'll continue to consult with our allies and partners in the region. Shannon, go ahead in the back.
I can just ask you on a topic related to the PGA's intention to merge with
Sure.
Live Golf, because your White House counterparts are also declining to offer position. But I was wondering if I ask more broadly if you could respond to the allegations from many, including family members of 9/11 victims, that Saudi Arabia is attempting to sports wash its reputation now. And on Saudi Arabia's purported human rights violations, does the State Department see any room for sports diplomacy on these fronts? Or does it require more intense, serious diplomacy?
What I will say broadly, and you have seen us engage on this issue, is that we think that across our diplomatic efforts, as it relates to the whole world, we think that there is an opportunity to engage via sports diplomacy and engage with allied and partners countries over some of these many shared cultural endeavors. Specifically, as it relates to this forthcoming deal, I just don't have anything to offer, as these are two private entities, and I don't have anything to offer from the State Department. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Jahan Zaibali from Airway News. Former Prime Minister Imran Khan has reiterated his U.S. conspiracy claims in an interview with The Intercept. He also blames the former Pakistani ambassador and military chief, General Bajo, of convincing U.S. that Imran Khan is anti-American. So the question is that was U.S. manipulated in backing overthrow of Imran Khan, as he's claiming right now?
These allegations are categorically false. You have heard me say this before. Pakistani politics are a matter for the Pakistani people to decide and for them to pursue within the auspices of their own constitution and laws. The U.S. values our longstanding cooperation with Pakistan, and we've always viewed a prosperous and democratic Pakistan as critical to U.S. interests, and that remains unchanged.
There are a couple of American citizens arrested in Islamabad after the May 9 protest. Their families trying to reach out to the U.S. government to help their release. Is there any contact with them? Any update on that?
So I'm certainly not going to get into the specifics of each case given privacy concerns, but of course whenever a U.S. citizen is arrested overseas, we stand ready to provide all appropriate assistance, and we expect Pakistani authorities to respect all fair trial guarantees owed to these detainees.
So one last question.
Sure.
Prime Minister Modi is coming to Washington very soon. So, sir, will U.S. discuss the democratic backsliding and human rights issue with him?
Well, I spoke about the forthcoming state visit a little bit yesterday, and I will reiterate again that our partnership with India is one of the most consequential. It is a consequential relationship. We work closely with the Indian government on some of our most vital priorities, and we look forward to hosting them here later this month and continuing to deepen our engagement on these issues, whether it be concerning the climate crisis, fostering an open and accessible secure technology ecosystem, upholding a free and open Indo-Pacific, deepening our trade and security cooperation as well. And as we do with nations around the world, we will also regularly engage on human rights issues directly with governments as it relates to issues that are in the American interest.
Can I follow up on Pakistan briefly?
Sure.
Do you have a number of American citizens who have been detained since Imran Khan's removal? I mean, since his arrest?
I don't have a specific number for you, Sean. I'm happy to check. Obviously, these circumstances, depending on privacy considerations, we'll have to circle back on that.
Can I ask you just about one particular case? Khadija Shah, she's a fashion designer of some prominence there who I believe is also a U.S. citizen. Do you have anything specifically to say about her case? She reports that she was arrested because of tweeting criticism of the army.
We've been following the case of Khadija Shah and have asked Pakistani officials for consular access to her. As I've previously said, we always urge foreign governments to allow and follow consular notifications for procedures when American citizens are detained. Believe Ms. Shah is a dual national, and so we continue to engage directly with the government of Pakistan on this.
No consular access yet to her?
I have nothing additional to report. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
On June 8th, Secretary Blinken will co-host a ministerial meeting about the global coalition to defeat ISIS. And this meeting comes at a time that there's thousands of the ISIS militants and also their family members are being held in the SDF campus in Syria. Then do you think keeping those ISIS militants and also their families in the fragile facilities in Syria is a good solution? If not, then how the U.S. will help to bring this issue to an end?
We have talked about it as a good solution. I'm not going to get ahead of the ministerial. The secretary, of course, will finish up his program in Jeddah and then head on to Riyadh for the de-ISIS ministerial. And I'm certainly not going to get ahead of that process. But you've heard me previously speak about broadly that the repatriation of foreign nationals has been a key priority for the de-ISIS campaign broadly. We believe that that is an important step to stabilize the security situation in places like Al-Hol, but also it is important for lessening the burden on the camps themselves, and we think that it is a important, durable solution to address the security situation writ large.
The countries are not willing to repatriate their nationals to their country. If they are not willing to do that, well, what's the alternative?
This is something we continue to engage on directly, and I have no doubt it'll be something that is discussed through the auspices of the ministerial.
And another question on ISIS, then the U.S. is going to address the continued threats of ISIS. We know that the ISIS has 0 lands in control, but they are still active in certain areas, and they are doing attacks on different fronts in Syria and Iraq. As you have no combat forces in Iraq and also a few hundred troops in Syria, how are you going to make sure that ISIS will be defeated, endured, and are you giving any sophisticated tools to the local forces that are fighting ISIS on ground?
Well, our viewpoint has long been that there cannot be progress in Iraq without security, and which means the continued ensuring the enduring defeat of ISIS. Iraqi security forces are leading the fight, and the United States and a global coalition are supporting them to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS. Together, Iraq, the United States, our coalition partners have freed millions of Iraqis from ISIS's campaign. We've liberated nearly 20,000 square miles of territory from ISIS. I don't have any specific updates to offer as it relates to support to Peshmerga or some of these specific security forces, and I will let our colleagues at the Pentagon speak to that any further. Simon, go ahead.
Question on Nigeria.
Yep.
Some of my colleagues and also Human Rights Watch have some reporting out today about a military airstrike on January 24th that killed estimated 39 civilians. And there seems to be part of a broader pattern of airstrikes that the Nigerian Air Force has engaged in that seem to be hitting a lot of civilians, and there isn't accountability or sort of justice for the victims of these. According to these reports, according to what my colleagues have found. I wonder, since the U.S. has a relationship with the Nigerian military, is this something that you're expressing concerns about to them? Are you putting any conditions on cooperation with the Nigerian military in terms of them making sure that they're not these airstrikes are not hitting civilians?
So we are aware of the January 2023 incident described in the Reuters reporting. We take all reports of civilian casualties seriously. Reports of civilian casualties should be thoroughly and transparently investigated. I will let the Nigerian military speak to details of the incident and any training and technical assistance that the U.S. Is involved in as it relates to preventing civilian casualties are central to our security cooperation with the Nigerian military, but I don't have any other specific assessments to offer from here. Go ahead.
I have two questions on Ukraine. Are you aware that Ukrainian authorities revoke accreditations of American journalists who do not cover the conflict in Ukraine the way they like? And there is an example of a New York Times reporter who had his accreditation revoked after he reported that Ukrainians used cluster munitions in this war. Has the State Department raised this issue with Ukrainian authorities?
We engage with our Ukrainian partners on a number of issues. Of course, broadly, press freedom and access and appropriate access by journalists is something that we engage with directly with countries around the world. I will let our Ukrainian partners speak to whatever mechanisms that they have in place for their visaing and accrediting. That's certainly not something that the U.S. would have visibility into.
Also, could you please explain why the State Department so far has been completely silent on the detainment of Gonzalo Lira? He's a U.S. citizen and journalist. The State Department has been very vocal when Evan Gershkovich was arrested, and so far we haven't heard anything about Lira.
Well, whenever an American citizen is detained abroad, we ensure to raise directly with governments the ability for consular access, and that they are affronted all basic access for consular notifications, but I don't have any other specifics to offer there. Go ahead. And then we probably need to wrap.
This just broke in the Washington Post today, and it kind of corroborates some other reports that have come out in the last couple of months. It says the Biden administration was warned by a close ally several months before the Nord Stream attacks that the Ukrainian military was planning that sort of covert attack. So if this is true that the administration was being warned about this, and like I said, there's been some other reports in the last couple of months, why was the determination so strong in the beginning that this was Russia bombing its own pipeline?
So I'm not going to comment on or confirm reports about purported intelligence that includes information that even the Washington Post says that U.S. intelligence agencies were unable to corroborate. As it relates to the Nord Stream pipeline, several of our European partners, Germany, Sweden, and Denmark, have opened investigations into what happened, and those investigations are ongoing. I'm not going to get ahead of that process, and we'll refer you to those capitals to speak to the ongoing work happening there. All right, thanks everybody.